you so much.
All right, let me begin with you, Dr. Brian. What makes this summit different from every other summit that we have had towards improving our economy, repositioning Africa for the world to see as it is?
Thank you very much. Very important question. It is because what we do is beyond having a summit. Most summits begin with engagements to get people gathered for the summit, but most of them end after the ours go beyond that. Engagements begin, and then after the summit, we have a white paper that we continue to engage with the governments and other stakeholders on, because the key idea is to have this summit help establish Africa as a frontier of global thinking on major economic, cultural, and social issues affecting the world. So that is the unique thing, that we're not just looking at gathering people, we're looking at having conversations around our common issues in Africa. But beyond having those conversations, we also facilitate, the necessary collaborations that are required to see that those issues are resolved. So specifically, it is our focus on not just gathering people, but to see that the gathering translates to tangible results, a result that affects the life of the common man in the streets of Accra or Ghana or Lagos. That's what really makes the Africa Economic Summit unique.
I am assuming this is not the first summit. So talk to us about perhaps results you have achieved with other summits, seeing that this is quite different. There is a white paper done, and then we see policies being geared towards all that has been resolved after the summit.
Oh, yes, this is not the first. As a matter of fact, last year in Ghana, we had 11 countries come together, and you're looking at many players and very senior leaders coming together. And at the end of the day, as always, as I mentioned, there is a white paper release. And those white papers has actually contributed in a policy review of certain African countries, and that includes, but not limited to Ghana, Nigeria, Gambia, and even Kenya, and another country, Egypt as well. So that's what we've seen through the years, that the engagements actually produce results, because you see that the governments are excited about the reports that we make available, and it's at the end of the day, it translates to policy review, which of course affects the life of just anybody, in those countries and in Africa, of course.
Right. Let me start with you in the studio, Dr. Sam Ohuabunwa. You are the president for the 2024 summit, the African Economic Summit. Talk to us about how you think this summit for this year will definitely change the rethinking the global infrastructure, also talking about the business infrastructure, the business environment, and human capital, and how Africa is being reshaped going forward.
Thank you very much. I think the critical thing is that we often neglect the potentials that exist in Africa, either through colonial indoctrination or whatever other complexes. We always look to the West for every single African problem. That is what the summit this year wants to change. We are pummeled by economic, social, political difficulties. Some are forced on us by global developments, which are outside our realm. Some are also due to our own fault, poor governance and ability to invest appropriately. So the opportunity for the private sector in Africa, I'm talking about the normal private sector and the public officials, to get together and share experiences, best practices. How is Nigeria managing inflation? How is Ghana managing inflation? How is Botswana managing inflation? How are we dealing with deregulation all over Africa? How are we dealing with subsidy removals? These are issues that are afflicting many African countries, inflation. So sharing experiences helps. The private sector also, how are they surviving? Nigeria is working hard. The government in power with their ministers and governors are always on the move to attract foreign exchange, foreign investment. Now, the local investors, How are you dealing with these issues? Why do you have problems where some local investors are even leaving when this attraction is? So we ask ourselves these questions and be able to offer problems by indigenous businessmen to the policy makers. Secondly, we believe that African trade is at its lowest. We need to trade amongst ourselves. We talk about the African Continental Free Trade Act.
That's right.
Not much is happening. So what are the problems? And this is experiential. We're not just theorizing. That's why we're bringing businessmen from all over Africa and policymakers. And you know that Nigeria is a major player. And any discussion that Nigeria is not involved in a substantial manner in Africa may not have that reach. This is the third summit, as my sister was asking. This is the third summit, and it's the first in Nigeria, which is, whether we like it or not, a major economic powerhouse for Africa. So we'll believe that the outcomes of this summit coming June 3, 4 in Abuja will help government get feedback from both indigenous businessmen and African businessmen. Two, it will help to create trade links, trade partnerships, business-to-business discussions that can derive benefits from what is happening in the world. So both in the area of infrastructure, social infrastructure, economic infrastructure, those contributions will be given, because one of the things that happens to government is that policymakers design policies, often not sufficiently consulting. And that's why there's this, go and come, flip-flop. The idea is to be able to give a feedback both on the existing policies and policies that are evolving to policymakers, and then the private sector will learn from each other.
Interesting. I'm interested in how much vested interest the current administration has shown to be a part of, this that you're talking about now, because all of that you have said is what is affecting us and can move us forward as a country as it is. So are they part of this? Have you been engaging them to also, come and share?
No, we have. Last week I was with the Minister of Trade, Industry and Investment, and she was excited. I met the Minister of Science and Technology. We have been talking to the presidency and other ministers, key ministers, especially economic ministers, and they've shown interest. Institutions of government, Export Promotion Council, investment promotion, and all that. We are engaging them because they appreciate, of course, everything that is new. You want to be sure that it's worth your while, and they've asked us those kind of questions. And the Right Honorable Benjamin Kalu, who is the Deputy Speaker, has signed on. We're working on the Senate President and many other government officials. We have an assurance that they participate because, summits are different levels. Right. Sometimes summits are just at the point of heads of state and, those kind of government officials. The real people, permit me to say so, the practitioners may be far when we are talking in Davos, when we are talking in Riyadh. We want to talk amongst ourselves, practitioners, and then government at the level where they can hear us one-on-one, spend enough time, grinding through the problems. Because if we don't increase economic output, we cannot alleviate poverty. Right. And poverty is the major issue for Africa. And every government and everybody that loves Africa must be interested in ensuring that every day we have an additional employment. Every day we have an additional output that will lead to wealth creation and poverty reduction.
Interesting.